Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Wilfred Riley and our always so special guest, Christy. I won't give her a hard time from coming from Indy on the call center because she doesn't have the big headphones. Christy Kelly, running for office in Arizona. Everybody vote for her. And our guest this week is Lenore Skenazy. She is the president and co-founder of LetGrow.org and author of Free Range Kids and formerly the world's worst mom. Lenore, welcome to the show.
Why, thank you. You know, I started out only as America's Worst Mom, so you're getting a little ahead of yourself.
Not the whole world. You need to
At first, it was America's Worst Mom. Yes, yeah. I did, claw my way to the top of the bad mom heap, but it started out more modest.
Well, I would think that most people, our savvy viewers and listeners, would know that story. I want to cover it briefly so people will know why you do what you do and why you're famous. But I don't spend a lot of time on it. But man, it's been that long. 2008, you did something that shocked the world, and then you wrote an article about it. You let your child ride the subway. What were you thinking? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, back then, when our younger son was 9, he had started asking me and my husband if we would take him someplace he'd never been before and let him find his own way home by the subway. This was his dearest dream. And our older son hadn't asked us this, so we had to discuss it. My husband, who is never referred to as America's worst dad, and I talked about it, and we decided, he thinks he's ready. We think he's ready. We're on the subways all the time, which always sounds like I have no home. I have a home, but we are on the subways a lot. And so Izzy, our younger son, and the older son too, had gotten very used to it, and we said yes. And one day I took him to Bloomingdale's, where he hadn't really been. And I left him there because Bloomingdale's is on top of a subway station. And he must have figured that out because here we are 15 years later talking about it. But he went downstairs. He took the subway back to our apartment, came home levitating with pride that he had done something grown up. He was 9 years old. And a couple months later, when I had nothing to write about, I wrote about that day. And I called it Why I Let My 9-Year-Old Ride the Subway Alone, which turns out to be a really provocative title, as it turns out. And so 2 days later, I was on the Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR. Took 15 years to get on the Charles Love Show, but here I am. And I just had to explain over and over again why I trusted my kid, my parenting, my city, my fellow humans. And I did, and I do.
Well, were you shocked that the reaction that it got at the time? I mean, it's not like you planned this big sinister thing. You're like, oh, he's written.
If I was that good at planning, I would have gone into PR, right? Because I would be running someone's campaign. I'd be running Christie's campaign at the moment. But I write columns all the time. I handed in one today, and there's only one column in my 20-something years of column writing that went viral, and it was that one.
Wow. So that had to be, it's right. And side note, we can't live. You're throwing out these one-liners that are funny, but we can't just skip over the fact that. And my husband was never called the world's worst dad.
He wasn't. I mean, maybe I'll call him now.
It's just you. You're the bad one. But that is true. But
yeah.
Were you surprised by the way they reacted to
it? Yeah. I mean, I actually didn't know a whole lot. I mean, I was a newspaper reporter, right? So I was in the middle of the media, and I realized that, this is a good topic to write about. But I think everything I write about is a good topic, and nobody, most people just throw the papers out. I guess what I came to realize, and I've spent 15 years now thinking about, is how radical a change has happened in America since I was a kid. And today's kids are being raised. I promised myself I would never say kids today, but here I am, today's kids. I guess it's a little inverted.
Yeah, that's a little bit different.
That's right. Because the way I was raised, which was walking to school at age 5 and, playing outside after school, and I'm happy to see Wilfred nodding, it wasn't considered unusual, and it wasn't considered dangerous And now it's almost unheard of. I mean, I keep gathering new statistics, and the most recent one is the University of Michigan did a study in September asking parents what they would let their kids do. And parents all responded, which I was very gratified to hear. They know that independence is important for children and they want to give it to their kids. But then when they were asked specific things, the parents of kids age 9 to 11, the majority of them will not let their kids walk to a friend's house. And this is across the board. Only 17% of the people said that they even think they live in a dangerous neighborhood, but the majority won't let their kids walk to a friend's house, won't let their kids play in a park, and 50% of them will not let their kid go to another aisle in the store when they're shopping.
Wow. Okay, let me say this. I'm going to go to both of them. Will second, because it's you and Will have and I, of course, also have a oddly unique but really logical view on the crime belief, what we call like the danger myth. So I'll do that second. But Christy, first to you. What do you think about that? Like the difference between, like back in my day, but seriously, about, well, I'm assuming all of us talk about how you grew up. I mean, the fact that it was so normal, that is a really strange dichotomy, how it was so normal for kids to do certain things by themselves. And now it's so normal for kids to do nothing by themselves. What do you think about that? And what are your thoughts as to, how that came about so quickly?
I mean, I guess it would be with the rise of crime, would be, I know, I'm going to get it today.
Who has the statistics?
You set them up.
Really?
This was not scripted, ladies and gentlemen. This was not scripted.
Right.
Go ahead. The rise of crime. Go ahead.
Yeah, with the rise of crime, with everything going on, with, kids being today, right? The trafficking and the, everything that's going on in society. I think it really has parents kind of, shook to not know where their kids are, to not pay attention to it. I know I have teenagers and I won't let them Uber or Lyft because of, the amount of stories that I've heard and things that I've read about Uber drivers, assaulting young women, and I have teenage girls. So part of it may be, I think we are kind of more helicopter moms, right? We can live in nice neighborhoods in the suburbs. But I think when we hear these stories and the headlines and everything we read on social media, it becomes, okay, we want to protect our kids from everything we see come across, our feed.
Will, she set you up. I'm just going to shut up and listen.
I teed it up for you.
No, I mean, I think all of you are making, I think Chrissy's making a very good point about what most caring parents believe. Excuse me. I mean, I will say, like, I totally agree with Lenore on this. I think if he's being honest, Charles does too. And I have two comments. Like, one, I think this is a really class-bound syndrome. And I think all of us by this point are kind of in this upper middle class. We all live in big cities. Like, I'm from Chicago. I think you guys live in New York by this point. We have people on this show from like Nashville, Dallas. If you live in most places in the country, like I live in Appalachia right now. When I go back home, it's not to Chicago anymore. It's to East Aurora, working class Mexican neighborhood outside the city, because that's where I can still afford property while I have one here. In most places where people would just throw away a survey if an intrusive government agent came to their door and asked them how many kids they had and how many people they were counting on their taxes, you see kids all over the damn place. They're running around, they're playing soccer. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, for entire urban scenes, from the gang scene, which of course I disapprove of, but to skating, tagging.
Yeah, you have to note that you disapprove of gangs. We were all going to think like he's on record as saying
let's
gangs
write that down.
Good. Right.
Social media presence.
Normally I love gangs, but
don't join the Bloods, kids.
Right.
No, I mean, like, the whole idea of the urban scenes, like Festi, which replaced rave, is that there are hundreds of young people in mid-sized cities just outdoors doing things. So like in Appalachia, I mean, if you go into the woods, there are kids out there like hunting and playing around and like pretending to stalk you and so on. So I think this is really class bound. Like COVID was like this. Like in most of the country, nobody ever locked down. People put on a mask to be polite to seniors, like light cloth mask, and just went to work. 70% of the people in central Kentucky were essential workers. Nobody ever did anything. The whole thing was just a panic that was centralized in urban upper middle class neighborhoods. That's it. No normal Americans reacted at all. So I think that that's the same thing with this, that they're going to traffic my child thing. So the second point in terms of what Christy said, and I bet I could prove that with data, like where did people respond to this? Like,
but
actually,
the University of Michigan, I don't think does like sloppy surveys. Like, oh, nobody answered at the Appalachian home. Let's just go ask in this penthouse. I don't think that's them, right?
you have to look at where the
That's where
survey
I do all
goes.
my surveys.
Yeah, really.
No, you
Press
have to look at
pH. Right?
no, I think that they're very probably the survey was pretty solid, but like most survey demographics that I've seen for parenting, you're looking at snowball samples in like mom groups. It's actually extremely difficult unless you're the census. And I think I could say this professionally. It's extremely difficult unless you're like ACS, American Community Survey, to get out and survey 10,000 people. I could easily be wrong. I will
Well, I don't
just
think
say,
you have, right. I don't think you have to survey 10,000 people to get, what do I know about demographics? All I'm saying is like, when I talk about this, and I've talked about this like around the country and not just in, Midtown Manhattan and then maybe lower Manhattan, it does seem to be perhaps not Appalachia, perhaps, I love it when somebody writes me and says, in my neighborhood, the kids are still playing out at night or, they're still riding their bikes. But the numbers that I do read from places that seem to be legit are like I I hesitate to mention the New York Times, but they were quoting somebody else's survey, right? Which was a survey of 3,000 people across America, 3,000 parents, that found across demographic the spectrum and across, that's race and income and where you live, et cetera, that the majority of parents believe, for instance, that the more supervised, structured activities that you could put your kid in, the more likely they were to succeed. And so even those who were struggling felt like it was better to put your kid in an after-school program so that they were learning something and that they weren't just wasting their time. And all I'm trying to say in general is that time that we think that kids are wasting because they're playing or they're riding their bikes or they're just doing something for fun, and especially when they're interacting with each other, and especially when it's in real life, that's not wasted time. And in fact, not having that time is one of the reasons that kids are so anxious today.
Absolutely, yeah. But I don't think we're disagreeing here. My one comment on that would be when parents say that, like, I think it would be very important to put my kid in structured activities. Again, I think there's really a big kind of 50-50 class and regional split in the USA. I think that would be a good way
but you're
and,
saying that out of nowhere.
no, but
And I'm saying that there's some actual study, and there's studies about how many kids walk to school today, and it's like 10% of kids walk to school today, and kids stay outside for 4 to 7 minutes.
Nowhere. This is sort of coming apart in a bunch of literature. I'm not really disagreeing with you.
Right. But I'm saying you assume that. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, I mean, the point here, there are many, many books that make this point. There's I think it was like Grosse Pointe versus Fishtown, the breakdown in America. I think that's Charles Murray coming apart. I think that you would see something very similar to this with Panic About Children. I would actually bet a couple $100 on that and see if I could write a paper about it. So when you look at these attitudes, like all parents think it's important to put kids in structured activities, that's really fascinating. Actually, that's well done research product, I'm sure. The problem would be that, like in the working class, 80% of Black parents and 55% of white parents are talking about single mom homes. So again, like going through an Appalachian neighborhood or playing ball in the projects in Louisville or something, you don't see any kids in structured activities. That's sort of a pipe dream. I mean, like, so there's like one community center in Louisville. I mean, I'm actually working on building another one. So like, I think that I mean, I try to do some good other than like talking online, but I'm sure you do as well from what I've heard. But the point of all this though, like the basic idea, I do think there's a class split in this, but the thing that Christy was originally saying, because I'm a long talker, I've been kind of rambling on about this, the whole thing that crime is the reason parents are doing this. One thing I think 3/4 of the panel would probably agree on, crime's down like 80%.
There was just a fantastic article today.
That's what I was waiting for. That's what I was going to say.
Look at had to swing a couple balls. Basically, like crime in the 1980s was New Jack City. It's down 69%.
It was awesome. Christy was like, "Say what now?" So that's what I was thinking, that she was going to both set you up, Will, and go back to Lenore. So I got to tell this quick story about New York. So because I thought Will was going to get to that point, he's getting to it now, and I know Lenore was going to talk about that. So we all agree on this in the sense that I call it the danger myth. So I'm gonna mess with my wife for it. So I was telling you, my wife is from New York. So my wife grew up in the 70s and 80s. So I was sitting at home about 5 or 6 years ago watching some sitting around flipping through channels. Some hip hop show comes on, and they're talking about the history of hip hop. And so she's not watching it, and I'm watching it. And she walks through the room while it's on, and she looks at the TV, and she goes, "The good old days, back when you can go to a party and have a good time and not have to worry about crime." I turned to my wife and said, the year you graduated high school, there were 2,000 murders in New York. Last year, there were 200.
Right.
So and I grew up in Gary, Indiana. I would go old school when Alton Coleman was free. And for those everybody in the Midwest will know who Alton Coleman is. See, you from the East Coast, you wouldn't know.
I'm from Chicago.
Alton Coleman, along with his accomplice, were literally snatching kids and killing kids.
Ooh.
He was a serial killer, and he was killing kids.
When was that?
This was early 80s. So people are like, "Oh, don't go out the house because of all this." So there was that whole milk carton, panel van, all the kids are being snatched. But when you do the stats, there were no kids being snatched. A very small percentage.
I just pulled up the crime rate, which, by the way, has separate bars for New York and Chicago because crime used to be so out of control. But I mean, just one thing, in 1993, robberies, 687,730, almost all armed. They note this. Last year, the last year on record, 281,278. When you say things like crimes down 70%, I mean, crack came to an end. There was resistance to that in Black communities. You saw similar things with meth. For white communities, we did CompStat, we got computers. The idea that your child, or for that matter, your wife, sexual assault, your husband, battery, people are more at risk today. That's just really not true. Right. So, I mean, one question I have down the road is why people think otherwise, the culture of fear question.
Even the summer of love, Christy, we got to go to Christy. I'm sorry, Lenore, but she's looking to make it in space. But even if you go to the summer of love of 2020, as much as we beat up on the rise of crime in BLM, 1978 is laughing at 2020.
1993 doesn't even say, "Don't even get me started."
Right, they're like, "You call that dangerous? That's a joke."
So,
so 2020. Christy, we've been listening patiently to a lot of this.
Right, go ahead.
So I'm shocked, and I'm going to say I don't believe you, and I'll have to look at the stats and research it for myself. See, I don't live in Statland, but if you, awesome. I guess,
we call it Staten Island.
I love it.
Sorry.
I love it. It's like, I don't believe you. All the kids are kidnapped and all the people are shot in the face.
If you were to ask the average person or the average mom, they definitely would be as shocked as I am to say that crime is down, because it does feel like it.
Right.
So I totally agree. There's a giant gap between what we believe and what we feel and what the numbers show. And you can look up the numbers now. Actually, there was an article in today's, I know you guys won't trust this source, New York Times.
She keeps saying that.
That says, that the murder rate is lower now than it was in the 70s, 80s, or 90s.
Oh, without a doubt. I believe that 100%.
But it actually went up a little. In 2020, it went up, but now it's down.
Yeah, but when it went up in 2020, it still didn't go up to 20.
No, it still never went up to 1993. 93 is like the worst. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. That
was uses numbers, and the numbers don't just support blind upper middle class panic. I almost always agree with them, actually. The one thing about the BLM,
and then I'm going to go back to blind upper middle class panic, but go on.
Blind upper middle class panic is a problem in this country. I don't think I'm wrong about this. There are other problems in this country, like working class people shooting each other, by the way. But I'm not just being critical of one class or ethnic group. I blame everybody. The idea that different groups have different pathologies, by the way, I think is something that's often ignored in the social sciences, and that really poisons a lot of racial conversations. So, there are a lot of things like veteran and poor white suicide, which is a big issue here, that are just totally ignored. So, you can say at the one time there's a concentration of gun violence in urban Black communities, and also there's a concentration of, say, wife battery and poor white communities. And you don't really have to, and not that you are, but you don't really have to go back and forth with that. You can just say, my reaction is, well, I oppose crime. Lock them up. And I think that's a perfectly coherent response to that. But what was I going to say before that? Oh, the problem with the BLM.
Lenore's wrong.
I actually don't think most of the things you said are wrong. Really. So this is my agreement mode. But no, the thing about the crime surge I'm kind of teasing, but the thing with the crime surge after the George Floyd death was really unique because only the Black murder rate increased.
Really?
I guess that would be my one point there. In 1993, if you look at Hispanic Americans, Italian or Irish Americans, crime rates are just very high. After George Floyd's death, you basically saw, as I think the idea was a gift to the Black community, a pullback on policing in Black communities. So the Black murder rate went from whatever it is, 15 per 100,000 to about 33 per 100,000. The white murder rate, which is also fairly high, didn't budge. So you saw a gap that could be perhaps 4-to-1 go to double that.
Right.
Kind of wild.
Well, I want to, since we're talking about your movement and the kids, what I want to say is while we agreed on the crime, we, the panel minus Christy, agreed on the fact that things aren't as bad, but she's right in the sense that if people feel it, they're going to react a certain way. So that crime myth is a problem because it affects that, which is true. But the other side of this, my concern is, like I said, I found out about you through Jonathan Haidt and Greg's book, and we talked about how kids are becoming anxious and things of that nature. So I don't know if it's cart before the horse, but setting crime aside as that being the reason why people do this. Another reason is the protectionism and this everything is so dangerous. Not just crime, but it's dangerous. You might fall down, right? The coddling thing, right? And then now the kids, now we're 2 generations, and now we're another generation away from the kids they wrote about, right? So when they talk about that year when they saw the shift of when the kids went to college, now we're a generation away from that.
Not quite, but yeah.
Right, yeah.
So about 5 years ago, Jonathan Haidt came to me and said, let's start a nonprofit based on the ideas of the Free Range Kids book and the Free Range Kids movement. And he was joined by Dan Schuckman, who you might know. He was the long-term chairman of FIRE. And I said, okay, but we also should bring in Peter Gray, who's a professor of psychology at Boston College, who has spent his life researching the critical importance of kids just playing. Different age kids all mixed together, running around, coming up with something to do, getting mad, having fights, or making up and then having some more fun. And what was I going to tell you about? So when you talk about generations changing, Peter Gray had a really important piece in the Journal of Pediatrics in September, and it traced how as kids' independence has gone down over the decades, and he traces it over 5 decades. As their independence has gone down, their anxiety and depression has gone up. And I know that causation and correlation are 2 different things, but he makes a pretty solid case in the piece, or they want to take it in pediatrics, that they are one and the same. If you have, he talks about something called an internal locus of control, the feeling of like, if you have an internal locus of control, if the, what you do and how you do it and when you do it and everything else is internally decided, which you feel like you can handle things and you're in charge, that's a great feeling. You feel confident, right? But if you have an external locus of control, and of course the most external would be if you were in prison or whatever, but if other people are always deciding what you're going to do and where you're going to do it and how and when, and they're always supervising you, or you're sort of living under surveillance, and some of it's the kindest possible because people are assisting you and encouraging you, but you're not in charge, that makes you feel like a victim, right? You feel depressed and anxious because somebody else doesn't think that you can handle your own self. And so as you have less independence, you have less of an internal locus of control. And as adults are telling you what to do and sort of watching over even those after school and weekend hours, you feel depressed because you're sort of trapped. And the one thing I wanted to say, Wilfred, about poor kids seemingly having all this free time is that if they do, I'm sort of glad for them. But when I was in California speaking to the after school providers conference, there were a lot of people there who worked in after school programs that kids could go to for free because they were provided by the state. And those seemed like they were very, very rigid programs. So it wasn't kids, poor kids were not having fun after school. Poor kids were given the privilege of sitting there for an extra hour and a half getting homework help, as if 6 hours in school was not enough. And so I worry that in trying to help kids with more assistance and more schooling and more tutoring, it really ends up being just an endless drag.
No, and I agree with that. And
I'm
I think
sure some of them get trapped too.
Yeah. And I think both the organization and your movement makes total sense. What I was questioning is, I was only saying that I wasn't disagreeing with that. I was saying, is there an issue that because the society has normalized that
Oh, yeah.
That one, it makes it harder for the kids. It makes it harder for parents who want to do this to push it because you're going against the grain, and it's causing them to do, to feel that it's making parents. Now, there may be schools, government, or whatever that's intruding too far, or the busybodies who call on you or whatever. But then it's also parents feel an anxiety too that they need to overparent and then they need to schedule every moment. And I'm like, I sit around other parents. I know my kid's in third grade. And for years, I would tell the other kids, why do you have to plan everything? Why can't you just play? Why does it everything? What's this play date thing? And I remember when we met, I told you I was going to tell you a story about my son. I said, I'll save it for the show. Okay. So my son literally called his grandmother because he thought I was lying to him. Because he said, how did you all play? Did you have play dates when you were young? I said, my mom didn't even know what a play date was. He said, well, how did you play? I'm like, what do you mean? Just go to my friend's house and say, can you come out to play? And he said, he thought I was making it up. Yeah. Right. So I told him, now he's kind of young, but I have the advantage of living in a building, right, where there's other kids that go to his school in the building. So I just told him, why don't you just go to some other floor, knock on some kid's door to ask if he can play? And they were like, say, what? And so he did. And so now he's like, yeah, can I go do this or whatever? But even that parent's like, yeah, I thought about doing it, but I hadn't done it. But nobody was doing it. They were all still planning the play date when he's got, 15 kids within his grade or one grade over or younger.
That's insane.
That you could just get on the elevator. There's security cameras on the elevator.
Yeah.
And they don't even do that. Go ahead. Yeah. What were you gonna say?
Charles, I actually just said that's crazy, but I mean, for the parents on the panel, I mean, this is actually something. I'm not a dad yet. That's difficult to imagine. So you're describing a situation where you live in a perfectly safe. I mean, you live in a nice building, and there are kids in the building. There are 20 kids in the building, but the kids do not go. They don't roam through the halls and play with each other. They only meet when their parents take them up and down between the apartments for organized hours of play.
Schedule.
So so let me jump in with a solution here, because that's absolutely true. I've heard it over and over again. It's shocking to me. And of course, I went and knocked on my friends' doors. Can Betsy come out and play? Can Joel come out and play? So when we started Let Grow, the idea was that we would try to change behavior rather than just changing minds, because changing minds, first of all, doesn't change behavior. And so it's sort of frustrating. So the behavior that we wanted to get to was what Charles's son is doing now. And you have to make it easy and normal for parents to start letting go like that. So what we recommend is that all schools do the Let Grow experience, where kids get a homework assignment that says, go home and do something new on your own without your parents, with your parents' permission, but without your parents. And the reason I'm saying it now is because I want people to hear it and think about doing that. And also, Charles, one of the kids who did one of these projects, what she did is she asked her mother, could I please go knock on the other doors on our floor? And the mother said no. And she was thinking, like, what if she gets trafficked? What if they notice there's a kid here? And the girl says, but what if there's ever a fire? Don't you want them to know that there's someone home? And the mother's like, oh, trafficked, but burnt to a crisp. I don't know. And so finally, look at mom, it's homework. I got to do it. You don't want me to flunk. So the mom said, okay. And so she knocked on all the doors on her floor. This was downtown in Battery Park. And she met two girls that she didn't know. And now she has friends. And we really have become so obsessed with the idea of both organizing everything for our kids and not trusting anyone that we don't realize that the world is out there. So you have to do once you assign this project in your school, kids start making breakfast and they start riding their bike, or if they're in Appalachia, they go into the woods even more. They get to know their neighbors. They get to go to the store, and they start feeling like human beings again, instead of these little FedEx packages that we're constantly delivering to one activity or another. And just one brief, cool sociological, anthropological, linguistical note, which is that in your day, Charles, Wilfred, possibly Christy, and mine, at the morning you went to school and it was what? Arrival, right? Right, the arrival bell, and in the afternoon it was
dismissal.
And now it is, Christy, you know this. It's drop off
and pick up.
Drop off and pick up, right?
So into the language has
even
been
the language.
Written. Even the language includes the idea that somebody else is always with you, and that you have no internal locus of control if you are being dropped off and picked up. You're just waiting for somebody to take you someplace and take you some other place.
That's true. Christy, what do you think about that? But just the
I mean,
freedom and the independence.
the freedom and the independence, I guess it would depend on where. I mean, if it's an apartment building, then that's fine. No, seriously, but it would depend on
of them needing it.
I think that they do need it. But one thing that I did want to question is you kind of paint this picture of if you let kids go, then they'll have like all of this time to be creative and they'll be outside playing on their bike. No, they won't. They'll be on their phones or they'll be on the Xbox or they'll be
get to that.
Or they could be together. So this, I just think it might be a little dated because now kids aren't playing in the same way that we used to play. There's no creativity.
So I totally agree. And the other Let Grow initiative is called the Let Grow Play Club. So what we suggest schools do with exactly your idea in mind is stay open before and after school. There's an adult there with an EpiPen, but otherwise they're not getting involved. But then there's all the kids who are there, who were there before school or after school, just a critical mass of children of all different ages. So you got the ages mixing. There's no phones, right? You give them balls, jump ropes, chalk, and then they can bring they can bring a remote control car, they can bring a doll, whatever they want. And so then you have a swath of time and a place for them to have that sort of old-fashioned childhood where they're playing. There's one person supervising, so that's okay. And the rules are you're not allowed to hurt anyone physically, and you're not allowed to leave without telling the EpiPen lady, right? And so then you have time after school where it's like the olden days, except it's done in a way that parents today will accept. And it's great. I mean, we've heard of kids being so much less lonely and making friends and kids of different ages because they had no friends in their class and coming up with new games that we wouldn't have ever come up with because we're adults and solving their own problems and getting in arguments and then having to figure out how to get out of them, which is how we learn to live with each other. So I agree that afterwards they would not necessarily go to the park and frolic, but if they stay at school and that school is not just chess club and reading club and this club and that club and there's a play club, it's really good.
Well, I would like to get your view and Lenore's too on this. I had a conversation with a friend, and it kind of goes to the importance. Lenore can use this to explain why it's important for them to have this independence and learn this stuff about kids today. The kids today, and I disagreed with her.
Today's
she argued, yes, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, today's kids, not the kids. Today's kids, she claimed, they're not as smart as we were, right? So I disagreed. I argued that they are probably smarter, right? Because they have more access to information and all this kind of stuff. So that it's not that they're not smart. I said, but they don't know how to do things. So the example would be like we were in the coffee shop when we were having this debate. I said, so a kid could sit down and tell me more about history at 12 than I probably knew at 12 today, right? Today, but they could also walk in here and you have the spot where you order and the spot where you pick up, and they don't know which way where to go. Right? They can't figure things out because we do everything for them. So it's not that they're not smart, it's that we are taking away that autonomy and that ability to make a mistake and learn from it. We do so much for them. And then we make the mistake of thinking because they're anxious or thinking that they're not smart, when really it's just that we've been doing too much. What do you think about that, Will?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, in terms of like, are they smarter or dumber? I mean, just as like a wonk. I mean, I don't think there's any change in IQs or something like that at all. I mean, there hasn't been any real reversal of the Flynn effect or something.
Right.
But I think, like in my own limited experience, yeah, kids seem to know a lot less about how to do things. Like, just to give a silly example, like when I play basketball with people who are at like the middle school or high school level joking around, they can't come up with their own plays without someone to call them for them. It's something that's really interesting that would be really different from what I remember from high school. A more serious example seems to be that young men can't figure out how to date.
Yeah.
Like, they can't figure out how to ask women out. They can't figure out how to send texts. Well, first of all, you shouldn't be sending fucking texts anyway. But they can't figure out how to get in contact beyond like WID, what you doing, hey, boo. And as a result of this, and I mean, the moms might think this is a good thing in some ways, but like rates of sex are down. 60% of males, I think, get through their senior year of high school. They've never had an intimate girlfriend. You're taking that into college, no experience. You have no knowledge of women. So it's not stupidity. It's just
Right.
that amount of free, not quality, but just great loose quantity time you
Yes.
used to spend with your friends. You used to spend with the boys, kind of chasing girls, learning about the opposite sex. Will you come to the lake with me? That kind of stuff. I get the feeling they're not doing that. You're
Right.
not spending hours on the court figuring out who the best three-point shooter is. Well, the girls watch you and make fun of you and sometimes play in the game. That's not happening. They don't know how to do it.
Yes, Lenore, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, a lot of thoughts. It's really hard to date and flirt and do that all if your parents are with you, and if you're in the car being driven to soccer, it's just not ideal for dating, playing, flirting, kissing, probably pretty horrible. So, I find myself pleading for some unsupervised time. But as we know from Charles trying to, get some of the other kids in the building to even knock on, your door or the other way around, it's the parents assume they have to be there for almost everything, and it becomes the norm. I mean, so we are trying to reverse the norms. And one of the ways to do it is with, as I was saying, the let grow experience, where if everybody starts walking to the store or going to the basketball court, there is some hope for parents standing back and going, oh, I forgot I did that. Or, oh my God, that's great. Or, oh, he's late. But, that's the way, kids are not perfect. I mean, parents seem to think because kids aren't going to be perfect, we shouldn't let them do anything, but like try to remember that you weren't perfect. But I had one thing to say about the ball game, because there's an organization called Steel Sports. It just happens to be a youth sports entity with like over 3,000 kids. And they read Peter Gray about how important free play is. And that made them start thinking, it's like, well, we are an organized sports group, but what if we gave the kids at the beginning, like the first 10 to 20 minutes of the actual practice, not before practice, will be devoted to free play. And they did it very calculatedly. I mean, they did it with a little pilot project and it worked. And what was interesting is they were worried that the parents would complain because I'm paying money and you're spending the time, half the time the kids are just playing. They could do that at home, but of course they won't do it at home. But no parents complained. And two things that happened were really interesting. One is that they said the kids started running to practice. And I thought that's pretty damning of the old way. Here it is, something we've paid money for. The kids are going to play. They love soccer and they're trudging. That sounds sad. And then I talked to them again like a year later to see how it was going. And one of the things they mentioned again, just in passing, was really interesting. They said, well, now when the kids get to the field, they throw down their backpacks and they start playing. And I'm like, of course. What were they doing before? And he said, well, they used to come and sit on the bench and wait for the coach to tell them what to do. And Will, you're talking about that. You're talking about a childhood that has become so used to being told what to do by adults that they await the operating instructions. And you're not going to get operating instructions saying, go kiss her, go ask her out on a date. Don't do it in that order.
It actually, and were you done with that part? All right. It actually seems like that's something that people are more and more waiting for, actually. Like a lot of colleges are adopting sort of explicit codes of consent around dating, sex, talking to people, even like, may I make this joke? There rule.
Really?
I mean, I'm not exaggerating, I don't think, actually. There are these sort of things like rude statements include, where are you from?
Yeah.
Acceptable introductions at
Wow.
this college. We have acceptable introductions at UK and KSU, and I can't imagine we're the most progressive institutions in the country.
Wait,
So
what are you saying? What is it, a something introduction? What?
yes, most colleges have written lists of
Oh God.
microaggressions. I
No,
guarantee
I'm
I'm
not,
not making this
but
up.
what did you
University
say?
of
Did you say, you didn't say
yeah, they're
introductions, you were
they're
saying
acceptable
microaggressions?
introductions at most
What's an
top
acceptable
100s.
introduction? Like, hello?
Hello. Yeah, but
Is
you
that
wouldn't ask.
acceptable?
Yeah, hello is fine, but you wouldn't, for example, like, I mean, I speak, fluent Spanish and garbage Mandarin. It wouldn't be considered cute for me to introduce myself in Spanish because I could offend someone. Although it'd probably be okay for me because I look Hispanic. So that would be unacceptable. I'm not kidding about any of this, actually. Although, again, we're not as extreme as many institutions. But I mean, you wouldn't ask, where are you from? Because someone who's an Asian American exchange student could wonder whether he's being asked if he's from Taiwan or from Cleveland. So I get the feeling that there really are attempts to structure every element of life as these young people move on to the next stage. And this seems to lead into the kind of paranoia that you see everywhere on social media or the first couple of years of life in corporate America, where people talk about things like age gap dating. If you're a 30-year-old businessman and you're dating someone who's 23, are you quote unquote a pedophile? Because no one at that age could be prepared for an adult relationship yet. I mean, all of this seems downstream, Lenore, from what you're talking about. So I guess kind of getting to the point, obviously in life, there's an element of risk. And if you remove that element of risk and you soft pad everything that goes on so
Yeah.
that you're asking these absurd questions, may I pass you the ball? Maybe the first time ever, may I kiss you? But this is a step every time you're on a date. It's this kind of crap. I mean, you're just not ready for normal life, and it's gonna show, and it's gonna go on for a long time, and you're gonna be on your dad's health insurance until you're 27. It's a problem as a society. War with China's coming.
But then also, I mean, we're not. I mean, this panel's not.
QED. Right?
We're not the youngest group of people, the four of us. So I'm just saying,
Hey.
how did we get
We're
here?
not the oldest either.
I
I'm
know, but I'm
40.
just
I mean,
saying we're old. I'm
it's
saying we're
recent.
all old enough to remember. None of you people are old, but nobody's old as me. But we're old enough to remember when we were talking about, when we used to always say, we go outside and play, and when you come home when the street lights come on. Like it would be the norm in the 70s and 80s to ask a very functioning, very well, good parents on a Saturday afternoon, where are your kids? And they would be like, I don't know. I
Right.
haven't seen them for hours.
Better yet, parents used to be able to kick their kids out and tell
Ah.
go and don't come back until the streetlights are on.
Yeah, go play.
Remember, this was an ad against the most extreme teen partying and sex. Like it's like 11:30. Do you know where your children are?
Dude, right,
And
Right.
dad eventually started saying, "Well, nah, I probably should by this point." That seems like a reasonable regulation.
I think it
But
was
I mean, like,
10.
is it three? It's 3 p.m. Do you know exactly what your kids are doing
Right.
at
Right. Are you
practice?
picking them
That's
up? Right.
But that's the question. How
extreme
did
over.
those kids who grew up in that environment and turn out fine come to be the parents that are like, I need to follow my kids around every second?
I'll whip you through the premise of free range kids, which was a look at that. Really, it was the media. Obviously, the media became more ubiquitous. We got cable
Milk cartons.
television, huh?
Milk cartons.
And we got milk cartons, and by milk cartons we mean not just plain old milk in cartons, but on the cartons were the pictures of children who were missing, and it said, "Have you seen me?" Do you know about this, Christy, or no?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm older than I look.
Okay. Hey, you're looking good. Looking good. If you remember the milk cartons, you look that good. It's like, yeah, I want that milk. Anyway, the terrible thing about the milk cartons is that they never mentioned with the little asterisk, by the way, I'm a runaway, or I was taken in a custody dispute, which is the vast, vast, vast majority of missing children. Right. And so it started to feel, between cable television and a 24-hour news cycle and the milk cartons, and then ramping it up with the rules for television changed, and you could show more gruesome things. And Law and Order, I once talked to a television historian, what a job, and he said that like there's not one episode of Law and Order that could have been shown in the code days of TV, which were up until like 1980, because it was just too gruesome and too gross. But then obviously came these, the floodgates of, I don't know if the floodgates opened or if there was a flood of, but there was just a ton of scary media. And then we got the internet, and then we got our phones. And so it's just been, just a tsunami of bad news. And of course, nobody clicks on good news. Everybody clicks on bad news. And so you click on that, and then the algorithm says, I'll send you something worse. And that's just where we are.
You think it's happening everywhere when it's not. I don't want to hold you too long, but I have to mention this. Do you think I noticed, because, this is what I do, kind of observing the behavior of society and what we do. And I feel like, I told you that I talk a lot about education on the school board here. I'm in the schools all the time.
You should get the Let Grow experience going there.
I will definitely, we should talk about how we can do that in some of the schools. But what I find that's weird as I step back and just say, okay, why are these things working the way they are? I find that, and I think I've mentioned this to some educators before, that there's this weird mix that's going on in society now as it relates to kids, where on the one hand, we overprotect them, bubble wrap, they're not ready for this, don't let them go out, don't let them do this stuff. So in ways, we treat them like they're younger than they are. But then at the same time, we feel it's perfectly okay to expose them to more things that they probably shouldn't be exposed to, right? So they can read the salacious books. They can have all these conversations with adults and tell me your secrets and don't tell your parents and doing all that kind of stuff.
Nobody is recommending those those conversations with adults. Tell me your secrets and don't tell your parents. Nobody's on favor of that.
No, but I'm saying it's happening in the sense of what we're talking about from mostly from gender and race and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is they have a hard time with doing things that are technically age appropriate, but at the same time, they won't let them do anything, right? You're doing all this controlling things. So there's just weird mixed messages of what is appropriate for kids at certain ages. Do you find that? Is anyone else noticing that? Is it just me that notices that, Will?
I get what you're saying there, where you're talking about, like, we had Moms for Liberty on the show, for example, and there was this discussion about whether books like Flamer, which is a story about gay sex starting at about 12, it's kids learning how to hook up, that sort of thing, whether that should be available in middle school libraries. And I would virtually guarantee that there's this weird overlap between most of the moms that would support Flamer being there and the same people that would think that free range parenting is absolutely insane. And I think we all know that at some level. Like, there would be, and it's almost kind of like the idea of NPCs in Twitter debates. Like, you can be a left-wing or a right-wing NPC, a non-player character.
Oh, non-playing character.
Right.
Yeah, you just repeat the pablum that your side says. So, I mean, there are many, many people out there that support full-on transition surgery. I don't know how many, but at least in public would say that they support full-on transition procedures for, say, 14-year-olds. About 7,000 top surgeries last year for people under 16. And that at the same time would say that sending a kid out to ride on the subway is, an exercise in erratic, dangerous behavior. And I don't think that makes a great deal of sense. And so you actually, final comment from me, but you do see this weird dichotomy with the very protected kids of a lot of parents. I don't have any particular panic about porn and gaming and so on for adults. But I mean, I read recently the average young male encounters, hardcore porn, M-rated games, so on when they're like 12. So a lot of these people that are totally protected by their parents, like you're driven to soccer in the back of the van with 8 other dudes. I mean, when you come home, it's very likely that the girl you've talked to twice will send you some interesting and exotic videos. If not, you'll log on to Pornhub. Like, you'll see all kinds of crazy shit. It just won't be real. So there's this dichotomy between your online world where anything is possible, where things that would never be possible in real life are going to be happening.
You can't even say hello to the girl in real life.
In real life.
Doubt you're going to get to 19th base.
That's actually an extraordinarily important point. Like, this dichotomy for young men between the fantasy world and the real world, where in reality, you've never kissed a girl.
All right.
And online, you're watching orgies and people killing aliens and so on. Like, that is, if you're 10, that's going to have a major impact on your mind.
And Lenore, please don't lose your point. You were going to say something, but I got to say, I'm not saying it's happening all the time everywhere, but for those who say it's not a real thing, I told you I was on the school board. The last meeting was literally at the public speaking portion, a long line of people coming to speak to demand that one of our members, elected officials, resign or gets removed because of their non-support of transitioning young kids into school. They were all there to say, how dare that person say young kids can't be trans kids. They said something in a WhatsApp conversation that there are no such thing as young trans kids. And they were like, no, if I came out of the closet at 21 and I would be dead if that person would have been around. Well, that's not the same thing as transitioning. And to a person, including one of our former guests, came to that meeting to say that children should be able, you said shout out to Tam, to say that children, it was that, to say that children should be able to transition. But at the same time, they're like, no, we can't let the kids do anything. We can't let them walk to the corner by themselves. So it's real. Now, how extreme it is, I don't know, but I'm seeing it and I'm saying it's a weird dichotomy.
So I'm saying to bring back some, all I'm interested in is the fact that kids need some playtime and they need some real world time. And if we give these things back, maybe the balance is restored to the universe, because we've taken away 2 things that kids have had since the beginning of time, which is the responsibility and the excitement of being part of the real world, not just the online world, right? The online world didn't exist, and not just in your home, and the time to be with kids in real life, not on phones, learning to interact, learning to say hello, learning to get a ball game started. And these are very easy things that can happen at schools. The Let Grow experience costs nothing. The only price of the Let Grow Play Club is having somebody there, and the EpiPen, of course. So if you want to just have a slightly more, what we would all consider normal and safe and healthy and kind of joyful and internal locus of control childhood, bring back some independence and some free play. And the way to do it is, you can do it through your own home and try to get your kids to do stuff on your own, as you did, Charles. But if you do it through a group, whether it's a school or a church or the YMCA has free play, and encouraging the kids, everyone in your church, to go out and run errands this afternoon. You just have to collectively re-normalize the idea that kids are part of the world and kids deserve playtime that is not online, that is not organized by an adult.
Well, one last thing I want to say, though, is I like that, and I hope people will get the information, letgrow.org.
Thank you.
And find out how to get in school. We're going to talk about, since we're both here in New York, but what do they do aside from the school? Like, how would they do it if it's not part of the school?
I'd say it's always easier. Find a friend, find somebody in your neighborhood, like you just did in your building. Your son was friends with one kid, and then they started, being able to knock on each other's door.
I do want to say you're right. That each other happened, because once he started doing, they started to come down.
Right. And then there's probably some other kids in the building, and then they'll go knock on his door or her door. So I'd say it's always easier together. One of the things I came up with, I don't know if anybody ever does this, is the work date, play date. I know I hate the word play date too, but it's out there. And so it's like, I'm always working from home. I'm on my computer. Go to a friend's house, and the two of you work on your computers, and you send the kids outside, right? And so they have somebody to be with, and then they're not bored. I mean, because kids, it's not that the outdoors beckons kids, it's that other kids, the possibility of fun beckons other kids. So if there's other kids for them to play with, have a party and have the kids in the basement. You can't come up and ask us questions. We're drinking, whatever. Try it. It's just the profound thing about what I'm talking about is that once you've been sort of pushed to let your kid go, and Christy, you'll probably have seen this, when they do something on their own and they return home and they ran an errand for you, or they went to the park and they come home flushed because they finally played basketball with people that they didn't know, and they're so proud and you're so proud that it rewires your brain. It's like, oh, this is not awful. This is kind of easy and kind of great. And I feel good, and I had free time, and they feel good. And it gives you both back a separate world, and it makes you proud in the way that parents always used to be proud, like my kid killed a deer, or my kid, made a basket. You just have to let them do something in the real world. And then you realize, you have kids so that they'll continue on when you're gone, not put it too bluntly, right? But they will. And so when you see them succeeding without you, then you know that they're going to be okay. And it's an existential pride that you're feeling, because that's the point. That's why they're here, right? And until you see them do something without you, you don't know that they're going to be okay without you.
Right. She is Lenore Skenazy, president and co-founder of Let Grow and author of Free Range Kids. Lenore, it's been great talking with you. Thank you.
It's been a wild night. Thank you, guys.
From you commies who let know you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.